I mean, my typing is still going to be very loud, but that's okay.
Okay. That's part of the charm.
Okay, all right, here we go. Let's go live. Hello, everyone. This is Yay Emacs. I forgot which number. 32 or something like that. Anyhow, I'm here with Prot because it's Emacs Carnival for May 2026, and the theme is May I Recommend, because I like puns and couldn't pass up the chance to say May. So May I Recommend is our topic. And our goal for this one is to brain dump a whole bunch of things that people might find useful in their Emacs learning journey. Ideally for every stage, whether you're well, we've already talked about newbies and starter kits in the previous two conversations that we've had in session Prot Talk Emacs. So this time we're going to focus more on maybe users who are getting started with, learning it. They've decided this is going to be their everyday tool. They want to learn more about keyboard shortcuts and finding their way around, building the habits, finding the preferred resources. To power users maybe who are starting to look at different packages. These are maybe the people who are saying, okay, maybe let's try this package for working with org mode in addition to the basic stuff, or let's try doing email in Emacs. To customizers who are beginning to get into Emacs Lisp to write functions. This is where you start to customize it a lot more to your tastes and your workflows. To contributors and people who are actually sharing their source code, maybe even turning it into packages, participating in mailing lists and discussions. So this whole range of people, all working on different skills at different levels. And what I think we're going to do with this is we're just going to brain up a whole bunch of recommendations. And you're welcome to ask questions, Spot, and I'll ask you questions as well, and we'll just untangle everything and organize everything afterwards. So
Sounds great.
there we go. All right. In this list of skills that people can develop, are you coming across other? Are you thinking of other skills that aren't on this list yet that do make a big difference to how people use and learn Emacs?
I need to enlarge my screen a little bit. So I think what you have there is good. What I had in mind also is a more of a meta point or a more general kind of thing, like an approach style, which is less is more, if I were to condense it. Like start small and make sure you make it work when it's small and extend it from there. Don't start big and try to simplify it, because that doesn't work.
I actually I grouped that idea under managing time, notes, and attention, and also breaking things down, because the overwhelming nature of things is something a lot of people struggle with, both Emacs and elsewhere. And even just that meta skill of saying, okay, this is a small chunk that I'm going to focus on because I know that's what my brain can handle. Versus, let's architect this entire thing. You're 6 hours down the line and you're nowhere near the thing that you wanted to do.
And of course, Emacs invites you for that, because it's like, well, here are like 100 powerful tools for you to combine in ways that nobody else has thought of before, right? So it's like asking you to do that, but it's a trap. You don't want to go down that route.
All right.
Or
So
at least don't go there too early. Yeah.
managing the rabbit hole. Okay, yes, there are going to be a lot of temptations, and some of those temptations are quite legitimate. Yeah, you do have to figure this part out in order to get this other thing that you wanted working. But sometimes it's just a trap.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's managing. Okay, let's. What other meta skills here should we talk about as a framework so that when we dive into the specifics, we know we're covering a lot of the ground people need?
Not so much a meta skill, but consistent with this line of reasoning is, as a good heuristic, start with what is built in and extend from there. Because
Okay.
usually what is built in will give you like a baseline of functionality. So it kind of works with a less is more approach.
And I sort of feel that sometimes a bit of figuring out the words to look for, finding out what it might be called in Emacs source or in the built-in packages. And that's something that it's hard to develop unless you're reading manuals and reading other people's posts, because the terminology can be quite arcane.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so getting a sense of what might be built in and what it might be called and where to look for it, I think, is definitely a skill.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. One good way to think of this is what do I want to do? Like in the most simple form. Like if you forget about Emacs, for example, for a second, and you're like, okay, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to write a blog, or I'm trying to deal with email correspondence, or I'm trying to manage my to-dos. Like in its most simplest form, how can I solve this problem? And
And
that can already help you formulate the questions.
formulating the questions is actually really hard in the sense that sometimes people don't even notice that there's a question that they can ask, and they don't know what kinds of solutions might address that problem actually. Like, they get distracted by A, but actually it's B that will solve the problem. And considering the different kinds of solutions that can address the same problem, developing a sense of which ways are easier to do the Emacs way versus harder to do. Like, why make something really complicated when a built-in package or whatever can solve that problem in a more elegant way. All of these things that require the development of intuition.
Yes, yes. And with some experience, of course, that helps for sure. But then it's the other, which you can also consider as a meta skill. I believe there was also a point of this, like be okay with declaring bankruptcy in Emacs bankruptcy. I think basically the essence of that is not really Emacs bankruptcy, but be okay with trying something which is like an experiment and then learning something from it, distilling the essence of that, and then trying something else. So I think a sense of experimentation will help you build that skill of, okay, now I can intuitively figure out what works and what doesn't work.
And I think that's a really interesting point, because sometimes you get very attached to, okay, there's this thing that I've started to build, and then you start bolting more and more things onto it. When really sometimes the prototype is your way of understanding the problem. And then when you take it all out and you say, okay, now that I understand a little bit more, what can I make? How do I change my workflow with that new understanding? And sometimes it's as extensive as declaring Emacs bankruptcy and starting again from scratch. And sometimes it's just like, maybe the approach that I'm taking is not a fruitful one. I should go try something else.
Yeah, exactly. And you can only have that feedback loop if you try. So trial and error basically is the way to go.
G Centauri has a question or a comment about discoverability. So figuring out, I guess, how to navigate Emacs in order to discover things. Where would we put that in this skill? Like, how would he? This is sort of this figuring out the words as well, right? Isn't it?
Yeah. By the way, where do you? I'm in the chat here. Where did you read that?
There's.
Okay. I see it here. Okay. Sorry,
here.
it was off my screen. Okay. I see it now. Yeah.
Okay. Discover.
Okay, good. So, and of course, the Christian. Yeah, I'm reading the temperatures in Western Europe. They are terrible. Yes, I know.
Yeah, big heat wave. So figuring out discoverability, kind of learning how to navigate Emacs, because Emacs is lovely. It's self-documented. There's everything at your fingertips, but you gotta know how to get those fingers on them.
Yeah, the manual helps with present some of that. But of course, you have to read the manual. So you are kind of in a situation where you have to have the skill of reading the manuals in order to discover. But to discover, so yeah, it's kind of a tricky thing. You have to know where the manuals are.
Yeah, and you have to be unintimidated by them, I think. I got into it easy because I've always been used to reading books above my level. Even as a kid, I was reading, my sister's data structures and algorithms books, and I didn't understand anything the first time around. But after 9 times through, you get to start to understand some of the concepts and how they go together. And the more you read something, the more those concepts start to make sense to you. You read it, you read other things around it or related to it, and then the jargon becomes less impenetrable. You begin to understand it. So one of my recommendations is I recommend reading the Emacs manual, the org manual, all these like book-shaped things for fun, even if you don't think you're going to immediately use 90% of the things you're going to use. Every time you read it, you're going to learn something.
Yeah, plus, of course, you will know you are an Emacs user if you are reading manuals for fun.
But how else are you going to find out about, org spreadsheets and whatnot, right? I mean, it's just too big to
Correct.
fit in your brain.
Correct. Yeah, but that's really good. Like you could even make it a habit of, okay, this day I will read one chapter from the manual. Actually, to say something on this, if you learn about the bookmark mechanism of Emacs, you can bookmark info manuals. So if you are reading the manual from inside of Emacs, you can use the bookmark facility to be like, okay, last point in the Emacs manual. Like you could have a bookmark that is a rolling bookmark, right? So you could be updating it whenever you go to the next chapter, and this way, little by little, you can read the manual.
And in general, figuring out your navigation and note-taking workflows so that they're super convenient for you, whether that's denote or org mode capture or whatever else that you're using, as you read, taking notes on the things that you find interesting in a way that makes it easy to jump back to more information is definitely worth the upfront investment of learning.
Yeah, 100%, 100%.
Okay, G Centauri confirms they are actually, True Blue Emacs Geek was reading the manual right before bed. Came across the forums library. I mean, no, it existed. Yeah. No idea it existed. Yeah. So read stuff, make it easier for you to jump back to the place that you left off or the parts that you found interesting. That's a great recommendation.
Just to add though, another meta skill related to this, don't read it before going to bed, because if you discover something useful, you are not going to sleep.
I think the idea there is get really good at telling your brain, yes, that's really cool, but if you stay up until
Tomorrow.
1, you are going to regret it. So just add a to-do and let it go.
Exactly.
This may have happened to me a number of times.
Yeah, same.
All right.
So yeah, only read the manual in the morning, or when you wake up.
Okay. Are there other meta skills that are not yet captured in this, or do we start digging into each of these skills?
I say we dig in, and if we think of something, we can always add it later.
All right. What sparks your attention here? Which of these things?
No, you can go wherever. I don't mind. Anything what you want. Yeah.
Okay.
Whatever you will.
There's a whole lot of stuff here in the kind of the customizer, packager sort of thing around modifying or gluing together code that is not something easy for people to pick up because they're just not used to it in other programming languages or platforms or whatever. So things like, you could use keyboard macros to cobble together a quick workflow. You don't even have to write a big function. Just developing the intuition that, this is a set of repeatable functions or repeatable commands is one thing. All the way to, this is how I use hooks and advice to either modify the behavior of something where the person who coded it has anticipated that, a hook will be needed here, or advice in case they didn't plan for it at all and you're just going to override things yourself. How do people develop this sense of what's possible and how to do things?
Yeah, it's a difficult skill, but it's something you develop by experience. The point I think to remember is that in Emacs, at its core, you have buffers, and everything is a buffer, and buffers are displayed in windows. So if you think in terms of that abstraction, something like a keyboard macro becomes a tool that will jump between buffers, will switch windows. It has no problem doing any of that. So you are not limited in your thought to, I have to work exactly where I am right now. And I think that's a general approach that goes very far with what you do. Of course, when you are thinking of the advice and the hook, that I think is a little bit more advanced because you need to also have the skills to write an advice. With hooks, maybe not, but for an advice, you will need to understand exactly what is happening.
And so I have definitely jumped ahead here because this also requires the skill of reading people's code in order to find out there is a hook or there is some advice that you can do or there's a variable, and this is how you can let bind it to temporarily change its value during this part of the code. And so let's talk about reading source. What sorts of things help people develop that skill of reading the source code?
You have to just jump in at some point. Like you might do it by accident when you are in a help buffer, and either you misclick S, which goes to the source, or you follow the link from above. But anyway, the point is it's a good skill to just, a good habit rather, just jump in and to try to read it, even if you don't know any programming, try to read it as if it's English and try to see what you can understand. And of course, some functions will be extremely difficult, others will be more straightforward. So I think eventually by exposure through osmosis, as it were, you will already learn something.
Yeah. And I love the fact that our functions and variable names are often very long and it makes sense in English because we're not trying to squeeze into some like very concise, very terse convention. Just say like, yeah, put a full sentence in there. It's fine. And we just
Exactly.
use like completion anyway. It's all good. But one of the tips that I'll put in here because people sometimes miss it is the power of edebug. And if people haven't come across edebug yet, it's great because you can interactively step through what the code is actually doing, and you can evaluate what the value is of this variable at this point. And every so often I had to go into the edebug menu bar and remind myself, okay, you can set conditional breakpoints and all these other things that I have to remember that exist and can be used. But edebug, if you're going to learn Emacs Lisp, learn edebug.
Edebug is really powerful for sure. And it's especially useful when you have functions that are relatively long. I mean, what they are doing, like they have a lot of steps and you have to understand the flow. Like if it's a very short function, maybe you don't benefit all that much from edebug. But in practice, you will need it. It's very powerful.
And the other thing I want to point out is that sometimes packages have tests, and reading the tests can give you even more of an idea of how this function is supposed to behave. It's not always the case, but when there are tests, they're great.
In an ideal world, we update our tests.
All right, so that's reading source code. There's so much that's really interesting to read. Sometimes you come across interesting idioms for Emacs Lisp, and you're like, oh yeah, that's a great way to iterate through all the buffers. It matches a certain thing, whatever. And so if you're in this customizer phase of things, and you want to move to the kind of the contributor level, learning idiomatic Elisp is definitely like, okay, it makes things a lot easier. Charlie says, edebug and ERT tests changed the way I develop Elisp. No longer flying blind.
Great.
Yeah, great. In particular,
that's important.
I tend to break things whenever I make changes, so it's really nice to be able to say, okay, I'm going to nail down this behavior, at least for now. And with a little bit of thinking, sometimes you can write tests for things that you would do interactively. So you can test a whole lot more because you have buffers in Windows than you might in other languages.
Yeah, correct. And you get to see it live. Just to say on this point of when you are going through the tests and through everything, one basic thing which is in idiomatic Emacs Lisp is when you are writing the parameters of a function, if you are expecting a list, you use plural. For example, you have a function that goes through buffers. Your parameter is just called buffers. And that alone should tell you that it's a list of stuff. You don't say, for example, list of buffers, right? That's superfluous. You just say buffers, this automatically means it's a list. So that's very common. You will see this a lot.
Here I am. I've been calling my variables buffer list. Buffers is more concise. Sometimes figuring out, what I should call a verb, call a function or call an argument is a bit challenging. But I figure I'll just name it whatever comes to mind, and then I can def alias it or do a search and replace afterwards.
Yeah, but when in doubt, of course, be verbose rather than terse.
Oh yes. And when you find yourself still using the wrong words to try to find it again, just add more aliases and you'll find it eventually.
More verbose, more words. All the words.
All the words. All right. What other things here do we want to dig into? Adopting is always an interesting challenge, and it's a challenge at all levels here, right? It's like from the user trying to figure out, okay, how do I remember to use this keyboard shortcut or whatever, to all right, I've written this new function, it's great, but I have to remember to use it. Do you have any recommendations around changing your workflow?
In accordance with what I said in the beginning, basically iteratively, like try to memorize one. Like you have this new function that, let's say, streamlines how you list files in a directory, whatever, I don't know, right? Use it. Don't have all 10 functions and try to remember them. Just use one. After 2 weeks, use the next one. After 4 weeks, use the third one, and so on. And basically, little by little, and make it something that you just do automatically, you don't think about. And with the recognition that you won't remember them all.
And in fact, going on that point of automaticity, I also like making sure this stuff happens without me having to think about it. So if there's a hook that I can take advantage of to just have it automatically turned on, or if there's a, or if there's a context menu I can add it to, so that I know, okay, if I do this, then I'll see it in a shorter list, and I can get to it more easily instead of having to remember how to find it and all these details. Just all these little ways to make it easier for myself to automatically enjoy the improvements, or at least have a chance of finding it again.
Yeah. And this is in the spirit of prefix keys with the help of the which key package, for example, or what Embark is doing. So it's in that spirit. Of course, there are different approaches. Maybe you want to set up a transient, and in the given mode, you just type question mark, for example, and it brings up your transient with what you want to do. Like there are various strategies you can go about to do something like that. I lost your audio, just to say. Yeah, no problem. Let's see. Of course, I can sing in the meantime, but I don't think the audience will like. Let's see. Let's see. Yeah, no problem, no stress. Of course, we could do this. Don't forget that there was a time in history where cinema thrived with technology like this. So it will work. Okay, I can read a little bit from the chat. So something I love doing is, after I've learned that one function, at the later So there is.
Can you hear me now? No. Test. Okay. Woohoo! Successful panicking. All right. Great. Magic. Something is happening. I don't know what is happening. I will worry. My video is less important. It's fine. You may continue. Yeah, for sure. Even just thinking, okay, here's the here are the elements that it can work on, and here are the actions that I want to associate with those elements. I guess starts with the intuition of what are the things that I can address. And what I do is I just look at the Embark source code and I'm like, oh yeah, okay, organics, that makes sense, and variables and all that stuff. So I always like looking at people's setups. Okay, this one says, you are now too quiet. Can you say something? Okay, this is definitely a me problem. Hang on a second. Okay. I think... Oh, technology. Why is it so fun? Test. No, this is not right. No.
Let me know if you can hear me now.
Or...
And of course, in the meantime, I can comment on the weather. I don't know if I can be heard. But in Western Europe, the temperatures are record high. And here in the mountain of Cyprus, it's like 20 degrees Celsius max.
Okay. So, did you hear any of the stream? Is Prot's audio okay now? You gotta keep talking, I guess.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
It's completely different. No. We can hear him. Okay, good.
Okay.
Loud and clear. Wonderful. Okay, it works.
All right. Okay. Back to brain dumping. Very good.
Yeah,
so we
good.
talked about so Embark and other things and practices and workflows. I find I learned by reading other people's configurations, but it does take again a fair bit of intuition in the first place to realize, all right, this part of the configuration means this, and and how to adapt that into my own workflow. Is there a way for people to develop that aside from just reading tons and tons of configs?
At some point, you just have to try. You just have to try and be like, okay, this package, everybody raves about it. They must be doing something good. I don't know what that is, so I have to try it and see for myself. And then for something like Embark, let's use Embark. We are just using it as an example, but I think it's a good example for other things. Like something like Embark can do like a million things, but you can also use it for just one thing, right? So find the one thing that you can use it for that, then figure out what is the second thing and take it from there. The same can be said for org and all sorts of packages.
I find that sometimes videos are useful for it in terms of seeing it in context, but on the other hand, sometimes I don't have the patience to watch a whole video. I particularly enjoy the posts that are both like blog post plus video, so I can just skim the blog post, copy the code without having to pause and type things in manually, but also see how it works by somebody showing me how they use something. So,
yes. Yeah, that's the ideal, indeed. Yeah.
And I do want to sneak in this recommendation to share. Right? I keep beating this drum, but whenever I write about something that I've learned, I always end up getting these comments from people who point out other things that I should check out too. So I highly recommend, whether you're a beginner or whether you're a power user of Emacs, try blogging. I am happy to add people's blogs to Planet Emacs Live so people can read your stuff. And all the notes are great for both crystallizing what you know, as well as possibly inviting other people to share other tips and comments that point out that what you just worked on is actually also a built-in package, and all you have to do is configure this. It's great. Happens to me often.
And what can help with blogging, especially once you are blogging about something that has a very high skill level, is that approach it in a diary-like way, where it's like, today I learned about such and such. I am not an expert, I am learning, and this is fun. And that's basically your blog post. You don't have to present yourself as the foremost expert on the matter, because then, of course, you will have to wait many years to write that blog post.
I think that calls to that kind of goes under this separate intuition thing for mindset, and accepting the fact that no matter how many years of Emacs experience you have, you're going to be a beginner in 90% of the things that Emacs can do. So we can totally just accept the beginner's mind. There's no need to worry about imposter syndrome because we're all like this. We're all figuring things out. And yeah, if you want, you can put in the disclaimer. You can say, I'm totally beginner. Read this for kind of the idea and not the Emacs Lisp style. If you feel like you're embarrassed, you're self-conscious about sharing your code, but yeah, we're all just starting out essentially.
Yeah.
And I like the fact that people in the community are so accessible. There's no one really saying, "Oh, I'm an expert. You should do it this way and only this way," because we're all aware that there's that. Again, we've done it this way, but there are probably 5 or 6 other implementations that could be even better that are already out there.
Yeah, exactly.
Charlie says that the leverage of blogging is unique in the Emacs community. Incredibly supportive, knowledgeable, and social group of people. So that's another encouragement to go try it. And that is all good. In fact, there are a few days left in May Carnival for May I recommends. If other people have recommendations, I'd love to hear about them too. Okay. So let's talk about. Actually, what do you want to talk about? What do you want to talk about?
Let's go and do something with the power users, for example.
Okay, power users.
Okay. So with the power users, of course, you have a group that is, I would think, in some ways more diverse. Because, of course, there are different ways to become a power user. Like one, for example, is using org more. Another is using it as an IDE, Emacs and stuff. So the common thread, I would say here, is that you are the kind of person who is digging deep, right? So that's what you are as a power user. So if you want to become a power user, you have embedded as a skills reading manuals and checking the source code, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think at this point you're like, okay, Emacs is going to be my tool. There's a lot of depth to it. And this is where you start reading, okay, how do I use org mode, or how do I set up my IDE so that it's just the way that I want it? And sometimes, like for fun, I will sometimes look through the package lists just to see what's out there that I can easily reuse. But often it isn't even a matter of adding additional packages to your configuration. It could just be diving deeply into the ones that you do already have. Looking for options, looking for little things that you can toggle on and off, or considering how the different functions can be integrated into your workflow.
And to this end, I will add something that I do frequently because it combines the elements of what we have already covered, which is MX find library. You select the package you are interested in. You go there, then you do MX occur, and you search for def custom with a parenthesis in front. Parenthesis def custom. And this will produce an occur buffer with all the user options. So you do 2 things now. You learn about the user options, and you are looking at some source code. So that's a little bit of, okay, that's one way I can start reading source code.
And this goes back to why we don't just tell people, you don't like customize, so the MetaX customized regular expression is off your list. Just look at the source code. You'll be happier.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, browsing through customize is also an option because it'll tell you about the things. You don't have to use the customize interface to set it, but I have come across very interesting options that way, just clicking around.
Yeah, for sure.
G Centauri is like, yeah, I'm bored, MetaX Lisp packages. Sometimes I randomize these things. Like I think for Emacs Conf, either last year or the year before, we had random packages being displayed as kind of a screensaver. And I know people have sometimes on their dashboards, they'll display random, random inspirational quotes. It could be a random Emacs package. I think at one point I had to display random interactive functions. Just so I could see you stumble across more commands. But taking advantage of serendipity can be a fun way to squeeze in a little bit of learning.
Nice, yes.
Yeah.
That's good.
All right, so Jason Terry says, yeah, I use custom just to explore. And another recommendation that I'd like to put in here is reading other people's workflow descriptions. Again, going back to blogs and videos and all of that. It's because, again, a lot of these things are not obvious from looking at the source code. But when somebody tells you a story about how they, what problem they had and how they combined pieces of different packages to solve a problem, then it becomes a lot more real.
Yes. Plus, it puts you in the spirit of Emacs, which is you can be creative and piece together different elements of functionality and have a workflow that works for you.
Let's try replugging in my webcam. Let's see what happens.
Let's see. The moment of truth.
Yes, maybe. No, it's not. Still. Oh well, it's okay. All right, that's fine.
No problem.
Everyone will just have to imagine my eyebrows of agreement. Okay, so that's kind of the power user sort of, this is how you get even better at it. I think mastering Emacs would probably be like a book recommendation in this area. And for customizing Emacs and actually writing Emacs Lisp, there's your Emacs Lisp Elements book. What other things would you recommend aside from, read the Intro to Emacs Lisp and the Emacs Lisp manual for fun?
Of course, what you have listed there are all useful. The other one would be in the spirit of what we said earlier of trial and error. Learn how to, or rather get in the habit of writing little snippets of code. They don't have to be the best code of your life, just something that gets the job done. And of course, you can improve it later. But by getting in the flow of writing your own code, eventually what happens is you write better Emacs Lisp. You develop intuitions of what could go where. And eventually, before you know it, you are better at Emacs just because you were doing this little routine.
Yeah, it's like noticing the friction is going back to our previous discussion about noticing the questions. This is also a skill. This is also something that you develop. A lot of times people do not even know what's possible because they're so used to just taking it for granted that this is a limitation of the system. So sometimes we have to see somebody else, fly through the code without worrying about like, okay, I have to go do this and do that and whatever. Oh, somebody says it's my OBS. Thank you. Ashra has pointed out that OBS has my webcam, which is why the browser couldn't find it. So I will tinker with that some more. But in any case, we will continue. Yes. So figuring out what is possible, and then writing a tiny function for it, and developing that habit of not tolerating these little bits of friction, I think is a skill. It's a thing you can develop.
Yeah, and another skill, which is along the lines of writing your own code, but maybe also a meta skill, is kind of be mindful of what you do over and over again. For example, let's imagine now you have a command that switches to the other window and then blinks the cursor or whatever, right? And these are two commands, and you do them all the time. You do the one, you do the other, okay? Now you can write one command, which is a wrapper of those two, and all it does is call interactively the first, call interactively the second. But just by piecing those together, you already have like your own little command.
Oh, I definitely want to point out here that you can use keyboard macros to generate the Emacs Lisp for it. So even if you're not that comfortable with Emacs Lisp or you don't remember what the keyboard shortcuts do, you can record a keyboard macro, so you definitely learn how to do that, and then you can get it to print out the Emacs Lisp that the set of keyboard actions ran, or at least the Emacs Lisp to repeat the same keyboard shortcuts, and then it will all figure it out. Anyway, so that's there, and you can save that. You can save that sequence of commands as a Lisp function in your config. So that's one thing, using keyboard macros to kind of jumpstart your Emacs Lisp. And the second thing is using Control-HK or describe key to see what a given keyboard shortcut or menu item will actually run. So that's all very useful stuff for figuring out the Emacs Lisp to do something you're doing interactively.
I think that's the most used help command I do. Like Control HK, like it's super useful all the time. It's very helpful. And
Yeah.
not only you learn what command it calls, but also in which key map it is bound. So for example, Control C in an org buffer, it is telling you what the command is, and it is telling you this command is bound in the org mode map. So if you want to change something, you know that you also have to be mindful of the key map. So there is your key map.
Actually, cancel. Yes. It tells you other shortcuts. Oh, and along those lines, one of the MetaX variants shows key bindings as well, which I recommend is, if you're a power user, you'd like to become more of a power user, even a regular user, right? You want to start moving to using keyboard shortcuts for your more common commands and setting up your MetaX command completion so that it kind of hints at the keyboard shortcuts. I think Emacs by default also tells you about it after you run a command that had a shortcut, but at least that way when you're looking through the command list, you can see, oh yeah, this has a shortcut, and then you can maybe even cancel out of your MetaX and practice using that shortcut right away.
Yeah, exactly.
And along those lines, I like using Marginalia and Consult because then I can see the command descriptions alongside the command name, so there's a little bit more detail there.
Yeah, I think you meant Vertigo and Marginalia.
Oh yes, it's one of those things. Yes, that it just works with everything. So Vertigo, yes, Vertigo for completions that show you a lot of detail, and then Marginalia to actually show the thing on the side, which is helpful. Okay,
yeah, and of course Consult is wonderful as well, of course. Yeah.
Yes, Ashras would like to recommend the Emacs from Scratch series by System Crafters. They say it's a bit dated from 2020, but still mostly relevant in general. So, there are a lot of video resources out there. So, that's good.
Yeah, that's good.
All right, so
2020, oh my goodness, that's it's been so long, I cannot believe it.
It's really interesting because I've been trying to organize, kind of the tutorial resources that people who are new to Emacs will come across. And a lot of times these videos are, some of the org videos are like from 10, 20 years ago, but they're still valid. So we have to make sure people don't immediately get turned off by the date in the video. But at the same time, they can start to tell the difference. Okay, this stuff is still applicable, but this stuff over here, it needs to be translated into how you do it in modern times. So it's a little challenging for people to navigate this, I think.
Which of course points to another meta skill, which is generally information related to Emacs is useful and it will work long into the future. But don't take a tutorial or a video as basically the source of truth. Always use it as a proxy. Okay, I get the idea. Now I will have to check the documentation and so
on. So I think that part of the learning journey as a user is also finding your preferred resources, because a lot of times you're not going to learn everything the first time around. So and everyone thinks in different ways. So you do need to spend some time looking for the kinds of resources that jive with the way that you think, with the task that you want to do or the workflow you want to have, and is using the language at the right level for you, etc., etc. So even knowing going in that you're not going to find one-size-fits-all tutorial because Emacs has so many different workflow possibilities, spending some time to figure out what you like as a tutorial or as a reference, and then going back to that again and again as your understanding develops, I think is a thing worth doing.
Yes, exactly. And of course, that's the whole point of Emacs more broadly, that it accommodates different kinds of people because it's so customizable. So if something doesn't work for you, don't try to force yourself to work the way it is. Rather, change Emacs to work the way you think.
And kind of on a meta note, finding people who think the kind of way you do is super helpful. Like the kind of the tribe within the tribe. So you're like, okay, if you know, like for example, you've got this cluster of people who like using Denote because their brain works the same way that yours does when it comes to filing, filing their notes. And once you find that connection, finding ways to keep up with what those people are doing, and often this is RSS because that's a great way to get the updates without getting buried in email. That can be a great way to keep stumbling across things that might help you.
Yes, that's a very good point. On the topic of RSS, just to say something that I learned many years ago the hard way is like RSS works best if you subscribe to resources that don't post like 30 or 50 or 100 articles a day. Like basically, if you subscribe to the BBC or whatever, that will not work because it will crowd out the blog that posts once every month.
What I do with that is I have different folders. So for example, the people who have
Folders, filters, etc.
folders or tags or whatever. So all the microblogs or all the very prolific things go into one folder, which I generally ignore because it's hard to go through.
Fair enough. Yeah. Subscribe.
The people who like post once a day or once a week or once a month or once every blue moon, then it's easier to keep up with them because it's not buried in all of that stuff.
Very
But
good, very good.
It's interesting. Like you can look into your RSS readers to support for keywords, maybe in order to do some more filtering and prioritization. This is one of the things that I've always kind of envied about people who use GNUs for reading RSS because there's like an RSS, right? Because then you can use GNU's scoring to prioritize the RSS items automatically for you. But that's definitely a power user thing. it's
yeah. I think that's a power user among power users. That's really an exception.
Oh, but actually, that touches on an interesting thing about this, becoming more of a power user of Emacs, in which if you kind of let Emacs assimilate more of your life, if you start to use Emacs for more and more things, you get not just linear improvements, but compounding ones, as the things that you have can interact with other things. I'm thinking even just for the base case of if your to-do list is in Emacs and your coding is in Emacs, then you can create to-do items that link to your code. But also all the way to like if your email is in Emacs, then you can make your to-do refer to your email and stuff like that. Right?
Yeah, exactly. That's where it gets really powerful.
Yeah. So then if you want to get even deeper into the power of Emacs, try to push more of your life into it. And I love seeing the things that people do with, say, browsing the web in Emacs, or what kinds of things do you do in Emacs that make you go like, yeah, okay, this is where the power of having everything together works out really well.
You already mentioned them, like email in Emacs together with your agenda, but also Iterate, because you can mark files and attach them to the message composition buffer. You can run a shell, Emacs shell, and your 3 marked files in Iterate, you type W or 0W and you get their paths, and then you can do something with them from a shell if you cannot do it directly from calling a shell command from Iterate. So there are many ways like that. The keyboard macros where you can jump, let's say, from a Iterate buffer to a shell buffer, or from one buffer to another, like all these little things. And for me, it's very powerful. Like you use it all the time, and at some point, you don't even think about it. It's like, well, it's just text laid out in windows, each of which shows a buffer. So at some point, it doesn't matter if it's email or programming or prose. Like at some point, they are all the same. So it doesn't matter at all.
And developing that mindset of it's just text and the facility for working with text, such as keyboard macros or being able to jump around or writing your own functions to manipulate it, or even just using iSearch to go through it, or using undo in different contexts. I think that's definitely something that people develop, and when they develop that intuition, it really helps.
Yes, exactly. And the thing is, in the beginning, you won't think about those linkages. They won't be obvious to you. But just be mindful that they are there, they are possible, and as you use Emacs, at some point you just feel naturally about them, and they happen, and you're like, oh yeah, of course, that was always possible. Yeah. Uh, of course, with the benefit of hindsight, in the beginning you will be like, wow, I can do that.
And that's the other reasons why I want to encourage people to take notes along the way, ideally sharing them, of course, but even just for yourself, because a lot of times you will get to the point where, this is just the way you've always done it. And on the other hand, if you had those notes as you're figuring out how to do it, and you share those notes, then you're leaving these breadcrumbs for other people who are maybe traveling down the same or similar path. And that's something that would be very helpful for people.
Yeah, exactly. And even if you don't have external packages, for example, a workflow that for me was so powerful that I was like, yeah, this is the way to go, involved grep and then editing the grep results. But even if you don't use a bespoke package for that, which of course is also built into Emacs now, the functionality, you can use the grep results just as a way to jump to the result. So if you hit enter, it takes you to the buffer at the point where the result is. So you can have a keyboard macro that jumps to the result, makes some edit, goes back, jumps to the next result, and repeat, right? And you can do that even without the package. And the point is that you can collect results and edit them in like a second or a minute, whereas you would need like literal hours to do that, and it would be error prone.
Yeah, and I think this points to the skill of being able to see and work with different building blocks. Like you have a block for this is how to navigate. And there are different ways to navigate. You could navigate to something based on some matching text, or you can navigate to something based on a line, or you can navigate to something, you can set up your windows so that you can switch between windows or whatever. And then if you can combine that with, okay, these are some building blocks for acting on something, or this is how I can use the kill ring to take it to, or this is how I can use registers so that I can save some text or save a position or whatever else. And the more of these building blocks that you can develop slowly, because being able to internalize the concept takes time, then all these different ways that you combine it to solve a problem makes Emacs very powerful.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way to think of it, as building blocks.
I don't know how people will do that either, aside from read the manual for fun and watch Emacs videos and read other people's posts. Every so often I think, okay, what if we make a skill tree, right? Because people like gamification, but then I'm like, this is going to be a really ridiculous large skill tree with arrows going all over the place.
No, you don't want to do that. It will be the RPG that never ends. There is no final boss.
Yogi asks, what is a built-in function's name to edit grep result in Emacs? I don't know, but what I usually do
grep edit mode, I think.
Yeah.
It's new, right? It's new. It's built into Emacs 31, I believe.
Yeah. I think I
grep
remember
edit
it.
mode.
Yeah, so grep edit mode. What I think of it is I go to the grep buffer and I press Control X, Control Q, because that's the general toggle read only thing. And so, and that's kind of another mental concept there, right? Getting a sense of what the key binding conventions that might might be translated into different actions in different places. So, yeah.
Yes. There is an annex to the Emacs Lisp manual, the Emacs Lisp reference manual, which talks about the key binding conventions, which is very useful for people to read. But even after you read that, it's a little bit hard to reason about the key bindings if you are getting started, but trust the process. You will see the patterns as you go. But generally, you can expect Control X to be global key bindings, and Control C followed by Control something to be major mode specific key bindings.
One of the things I like about reading other people's configs is that they'll rebind something and I'll be like, yeah, I can totally take advantage of that key binding because I'm not using the standard one as much.
Let me tell you about one I used. Of course, there are many, but by default, you close Emacs with Control X, Control C.
Who closes Emacs?
Yeah, people who make mistakes in life, such as myself. So, because I would fat finker that the whole time, you want to unbind Control X, Control C, and then do Control X, Control C, Control C. Then you can exit. I would do it by mistake the whole time, and I would destroy whatever I was working.
Yeah, kind of key binding design is this whole other thing that I haven't really mastered myself either. We've talked before about making the key bindings make sense when they're mnemonic. They're easier for people to remember, right? But this is definitely something that I struggle with.
So think of it this way. Of course, assuming there is a space for it, or you unbind something. Control X something is a global key, potentially with a prefix, as a prefix. So Control X R is a prefix, Control X P is a prefix, and they have global scope, right? So if you are doing something that is global in nature, it should work everywhere. You may want to do the same if you are okay with overriding default key bindings, right? And otherwise, you want to do something that is more specific, Control C, Control something for a mode. Again, optionally overriding what a major mode is doing. And then you have to work with that. And use mnemonics. Use like words that make sense. For example, Control S is the default key for searching. Meta S is the prefix for alternative search. Think of it, Alt S, right? So all the alternative kind of searches, such as Meta S O, right? So you can now think of Meta S and then G would be my grep. Meta S and then F would be my find, and so on. So you can think in concepts like that.
And when in doubt, keep which key enabled, so then it will remind you at least of what else you've had configured for that prefix. So that's the other recommendation. Which key mode? It's built in now. Just go use it.
Yeah. Which key mode is very useful. If you are using the Embark package, it has a key that will take over Control H. So actually, that works even with default. If you type an incomplete key sequence, Control H will produce a listing with all the keys that complete that sequence. So it will be a help buffer that it will tell you, okay, Control X, Control H, for example, will list everything that follows Control X. And it will name the command and all that. So that's also something to consider. I think if Embark were to add basically the which key functionality, where it's like Control H on a timer, I think then Embark would be a straight upgrade over which key in that regard. So Omar, if you are listening, yeah.
I get to talk to
asking for
Omar
a friend,
tomorrow.
of course.
Yeah, asking for a friend. G Centauri says, I recommend learning how to define a key map and put it under a leader key. I have meta M as my personal key map, and then the things I find very useful I add to my key map. And for this one, I've been experimenting with bind key, which makes all of this stuff much easier in terms of defining, prefix key and adding a doc string and all those other lovely things. And I like your other kind of meta tip about experimenting with how your keyboard is set up. So, for example, even on my laptop, I have a ThinkPad, and so even on my laptop keyboard, there's no QMK, but I can use Kanata, which you've also recommended elsewhere, to try experimenting with one-shot modifiers and home row mods or other things like that I want to. So, making it easier to press key bindings that have different modifiers. Like, I don't want to have to press Control and Shift and super all at the same time. But if I set up one-shot modifiers, I can just tap, 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 and it becomes easier to press.
Yes, exactly. And that opens up a lot of possibilities in terms of mnemonics, but also in terms of prefix combinations and all that. Like, you can go a very long way.
And I think there's kind of like a meta thing here also about getting a sense of what would make it easier for you to be able to continue enjoying this long term, because RSI is not conducive to enjoying Emacs long term. So.
No. No, for sure. Yeah, that I think basically something that I learned again the hard way through Paint is that you want to consider your desk, how you sit at the desk. You want to consider everything, not just the keyboard. So, for example, me, I'm standing. Like, I have adopted basically a a standing desk since forever. I do that all the time. I never sit, basically. Because it works better for me, I have the keyboard set up the way that makes sense to me and all that, and I can write all day, and it's what I do, and I don't have any pain. But whereas before, I would sit on an awkward chair, the desk was not optimized, the keyboard was definitely not something I had thought of, and I had pain. It was really difficult. And I reached a point where I couldn't write. Like, basically, I was like, okay, I have to quit.
Yeah, if Emacs is something that pays off better in the long term, it's good to have a long term.
Exactly.
Okay. Speaking of my very short term, in about 1 minute, I'm going to go off and and help with the kiddos' lunch break. I very much appreciated this brain dump. This was great. I'm going to do all the usual transcription and things like that, so we can start pulling out some of these ideas. Chat, if you found anything super interesting that you would like fleshed out into a blog post, say it. So we know what to focus on first, priorities, right? But this was a lot of fun. Are there any like kind of key recommendations you want people to make sure they check out, or is it just generally like everyone's
No, I think what you have here is good, because of course you can always say more, like so I will conclude with what I started. Less is more, seriously.
Yes.
For life, not just for email.
Your brain is surprisingly small. If you break it down into, if you break what you learn down into tiny steps, you have a higher chance of it actually sticking. And once you get something in, then it makes things a little bit easier. You have a little bit more space to learn the next thing, and so forth. Otherwise, if you bite off too much, it's just like you get overwhelmed.
Very nice. And that ties into the lunch break.
Yes. All right. Thank you so much. I will skedaddle. I will do all the things afterwards. Thanks, everyone, also for dropping by and hanging out. All right. See you around.
Take care. Goodbye.